Hello everyone and welcome to another Endgame episode with Coach P and MasterChess.com. And in this video, we're going to start a video series of Rook and Pawn on the 6th rank versus Rook. In this video, we're going to take a look at the positions where the defending king is in front of the pawn. Now, in this position, if it's white to move, then Rook to h8 is checkmate. So we're going to take a look at this position with black to move. Well, if it's black to move, black is able to achieve a draw. This is simply the Philidor position. If you haven't watched the video on the Philidor defense, I encourage you to watch it as I'm going to mention that quite a few times and it's going to be a little bit easier to understand this lesson. With black to move, the easiest way to draw this position is using the Philidor defense, starting a series of checks with rook to b2. After this, white does not have any shelter and he cannot get out of the checks. After something like king to c6, rook to c2 check, king to b6, rook to b2 check, king to a5, rook to a2 check, king to b5, rook to b2 check, and white cannot make any progress. If he moves the king to c4 going towards the rook to stop the series of checks, well, black all he needs to do is attack the pawn, and now the white king cannot come and attack the rook as black is simply going to take the pawn on a6, so the king will be forced back to defend the pawn and the series of checks will continue and white cannot make any progress. The Philidor defense is the best defense for these type of positions because it works for all of the pawns no matter what file they're on. It doesn't matter if it's a rook file or knight file or the center file, the Philidor defense will always work. Now coming back from the very beginning, I do want to show you another defense technique that only works for the rook pawn and the knight pawn. But it is important to note because sometimes you're going to get in some weird positions where only that method is possible, as we will see in the next position. So here, black can also draw moving the rook to g8. And now all he needs to do is stay with the rook on the 8th rank and there's nothing that white can do. If white tries rook to a7 check, the king will simply march to b8. Rook to b7 check, the king will simply go back. And white cannot make any progress. Rook to a7, king to b8. There's absolutely nothing that white can do to push black out of the corner and that pawn will never promote. Simply retreating the rook doesn't do anything. Black is simply going to keep the rook on the 8th file and white cannot make any progress. Pushing the pawn to a7, the black king will simply go in the corner and there's nothing that white can do now. Black achieved the draw. Moving the rook to b7 with the idea of checking the king on b8 does not work. Actually, black is able to win this game now because after rook to h6 check, king to c7 still guarding the rook. After rook to h7 check, the king will have to move away and black is going to be able to capture the rook and then also capture the pawn and win the game from here. So white just needs to accept the draw because there's absolutely nothing that he can do to win this game. And this next position is very similar to the previous position. The only difference is that white has a pawn on g5 and also the king is on b5. Well, the best play by black here is rook to g5 check, and after king to b6, now the rook cannot come behind the king with the series of checks, so the Philidor position cannot be achieved. That's why it's good to know both defense techniques. So the best way to defend here is rook to g8, and now black just needs to keep the rook on the 8th rank and he's achieved the draw. There's nothing that white can do now to force the black king out of the corner and be able to promote this pawn as we've seen in the previous position. And coming back, I do want to mention that starting a series of checks with the rook to b2 here does not work as white has an extra pawn. If white plays something like king to c4, rook to a2 attacking the pawn on a6 will actually lose this game. After white pushes the pawn to g6, rook captures on a6, pawn to g7, black is totally lost. After rook to g6, white simply needs to move the rook to h8 check, the king will have to move out and then white will promote, winning the game. And coming back after rook to b2 check, king to c4, I do want to mention that rook to g2 going behind the pawn is not any better because after rook to g7, white again has a winning position. In this next position, it's black to move, and here white has a knight pawn. Well, the best defense here is the Philidor defense again. So rook to c2 check, king to d6, rook to d2 check, king to c5, rook to c2. If the king marches to d4 going towards the rooks to stop the checks, well, the rook will simply go behind the pawn. And now the king cannot attack the rook on c3 as the rook will simply capture the pawn on b6. And he's going to be forced to retreat to c5 to defend the pawn, and black is again going to start the series of checks and white cannot make any progress. Coming back from the very beginning, I do want to mention that keeping the rook on the 8th rank here also draws against the knight pawn as well. After rook to b7 check, black just needs to go into the corner. So king to a8, after rook to a7 check, king to b8. And white cannot make any progress, and black is able to achieve a draw, just keeping the rook on the 8th rank. And in this last position we're going to go over, we're going to look at the opponent having a bishop pawn. Well, here the Philidor defense still works. Again, the Philidor defense will work for the pawns on any rank. So after rook to b2, white cannot make any progress. Black is simply going to keep checking the white king, and he's not going to be able to get away from the checks. If he's going to try to stop the checks with the king to e4, the rook will simply go behind the pawn, and now the white king will be forced back to defend the pawn. And after rook to d2, if the white king tries to go in front of the pawn, let's say king to e6, rook to e2, king to d7, after rook to d2, white cannot find any shelter, and those checks will just continue, and black will achieve an easy draw. And coming back from the very beginning, I do want to mention that moving the rook to b8 and keeping it on the 8th rank is not going to work here with the bishop pawn or any other center pawn. What's going to happen is that white is going to go with rook to b7, and now there's only two possibilities that black has, moving the king to c8 or moving the king to a8. If he moves the king to a8, after this, white will move the rook to a7. After king to b8, the pawn will march to c7 check, and now the king is forced to c8, from which white will reply with rook to a8, skewering the king and then winning black's rook, and now also winning the game. And coming back from the beginning, after rook to g8 and rook to b7, we looked at the king going to a8. If the black king goes to c8 instead, well, now after rook to a7, if the king moves to d8, white is simply going to go to a8 again and then winning the rook and winning the game. And if the black king moves to b8, trying to stop white from moving to a8, well, here the pawn will march to c7, and the same story happens where black is going to lose the rook and also lose the game. In conclusion, if the Philidor defense is able to be achieved, that is the best way to defend, as it's going to work for the pawns on all of the files. Moving the rook to the 8th rank only works against the rook pawn and a knight pawn, but it fails for any of the center pawns. And I want to close with an exercise which is a very common position and a very good one to know. Here white has a center pawn, and black is not able to achieve the Philidor defense, as he's not able to check the white king from behind. Also, moving the rook to c8 fails after moving the rook to c7 and then switching it over to h7. However, coming back from the very beginning, black is able to achieve a draw here due to a nice tactical element. And I encourage you to pause the video and see if you find the correct move. Alright, assuming that you've thought about this position, I'm going to go ahead over the answer. The correct move here to get a draw is rook to f7 check. This is a beautiful move. If the pawn takes the rook, stalemate is achieved. And if the pawn does not take the rook, let's say king to e5, well, after rook to f1, the Philidor defense has been achieved. White cannot make any progress. Rook to c8 check, it's not going to make any progress, as the black king is simply going to march up and down if the rook checks the king. And if white tries to use the king to go for a checkmate, let's say king to d6, the series of checks will come and white will not be able to make any progress. And coming back from the very beginning, if instead of checking the black king right away, if white tries to move the king to d6, well, this doesn't work either, because after rook to d1, king to c7, the rook was simply going to attack the pawn, the king will have to defend, and then the series of checks will continue. Alright, thank you so much for watching this video. I encourage you to visit my website, masteryourchess.com, where you will be able to practice these positions against the computer, and also to check out my beginner to master course that I've started. If you liked my video, please subscribe, and don't forget to check out my new website, masteryourchess.com, where you can learn, practice, test, and master your chess knowledge.